everybody. Welcome back to Behind the Scenes Best Ranger Competition. Glad to have you all back. Today we have a pretty special episode. With me today I have Captain Jack Swafford. He is the coach for the Airborne Ranger Training Brigade team. This week I've had the awesome opportunity to go out and kind of shadow them as they did their tryouts, watch them go through the Derby Queen. They ran, I think, a 5-7 mile run. They did some physical fitness, weightlifting competition stuff, and then they did another Mount Vesti, which was pretty fun. A lot of Ranger students get to watch, them yell at them as they go through it. I got to sit out there and watch them go through it and suck just like any other Ranger student, so that was pretty fun. So with all that, we're going to dive right into it with Captain Swafford here. Welcome, Captain Swafford. Thanks for letting me tag along with the team.
Yeah, of course.
If you want to take a couple seconds to kind of share a little bit about yourself and like a little bit of the history that you have with Best Ranger, because I know you said you competed a couple times. So
yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, Captain Jack Swafford. Before I got to ARTB, I was stationed up at Fort Wainwright in Alaska, and sort of in 2023, that was my first introduction to the competition. I'd always done endurance sports growing up. Like ran in high school. I was on my college's triathlon team, and even now still pursue sort of triathlon at a decently competitive level. But sort of I found when I got in the Army that I was sort of missing that competition aspect.
Yeah.
And so when I got up to Alaska the first year, they were actually having the BRC tryouts right when I got there, but I was supposed to take a platoon to go to a CTC. So I definitely would have rather have done that as a lieutenant first. So did that, but then pretty much pinpointed that, yeah, at some point, definitely want to, try to do Best Ranger competition. Tried out in late 22 for the 2023 team. And by that point, up in Alaska, we ran teams at a divisional level. So I was, paired with a lot of people down at J-Bear. Didn't do too well our first year. I think we didn't really have any people who were experienced with the competition. So we were sort of figuring it out as we went along, which was a great experience. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, definitely weren't as prepared as we could have been. So we ended up getting, I think my partner and I got 45th that year. We ended up getting cut on the unknown distance ruck on day one. But that really, being a competitor, sort of lit my fire. And I knew if I had the chance, I wanted to go back to get across the line. So thankfully in 2024, I was able to try out again. And that's where I sort of first served as like a coach for the team. So I sort of ran the whole train up for the Alaska teams in the 11th Airborne Division while competing. Then thankfully that year had a much better train up, sort of knew what we were doing a little bit more and sort of how to prepare for the competition. Thankfully my partner and I did pretty well. We were able to make it all the way to day 3 and ultimately finish 14th. Nice. And we ended up getting the finish. So
nice. And that kind of hits on something that like I wanted to talk about a lot is the different units. You go to these units and sometimes you think, okay, they're definitely going to have this great plan. They're going to get ready for Best Ranger. I was at the 82nd a week ago and watched their teams train up. And what you really notice, and even at ARTB, what I've noticed, last year with Whitney, he was a coach and a competitor, as he had competed multiple times before that. The importance of having a good coach in a program, like Regiment's a prime example of that, right? They have Nick O'Brien, who's been coaching for a decade now. He's been doing this for 10 years. Same system. They get them in, they train them, they get them ready, and then they go out and they compete. And what you'll see a lot of times is you'll see a unit come out who might come out and do decent this time, and then that competitor, they did that kind of on the wing, you represent their unit, but they didn't really have much backing back there. So they come down, they compete, they get the hype about it, and then they come back and you always see they do better the next year because now they've seen it. Now they've seen behind the curtain, they've seen what they need to do. They have a better idea of what they need to do. And it's something you see every year for Best Ranger. That's kind of what we're showing with like this podcast going around to different units, Being up at West Point, those guys, they're still teaching classes. Those cadets are still training, and then they've got to find a way to compete for Best Ranger, and they've got Major Tillery up there who's competed before, so now he's trying to use his knowledge to help them out. And then, the 101st, same thing. They've just did their tryouts this last week. I wasn't able to go out there, so hopefully I get out there this next week. But, they did their tryouts, and they have a coach that's coming in, and they're, going to utilize that system. So with that being said, moving on to a little bit about you coaching this year with ARTB, what do you see that, with your history of competing twice, what do you see you bringing to the table for the ARTB team as a coach this year, and like really hoping to, help them move forward and try to win it this year against Regiment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to start with, right, like, not that we have a completely new crop of candidates this year. I think we have a couple people who have competed before, but we ultimately, we don't have anyone that is finished and is coming back. So I think sort of having that experience about, sort of what it takes to get to day 3 and actually finish, sort of, I hope that I can at least provide that and provide some insight. Not that I think that that's necessary, but I just think it could help, sort of what maybe mindset or sort of fitness, shooting, et cetera. I think beyond that, though, with sort of me particularly, like I said earlier, I do triathlon at a pretty high level. And so I think that sort of going back to what you had mentioned before, sort of what you don't know that you don't know coming here if you don't have experience for the Best Ranger competition. A lot of people have a really good understanding of, I need to be physically fit, or I need to be a good shot, or I need to know technical skills, which is absolutely true. You do. But there's so much other gamesmanship aspects and, just small nuances of the competition that I think if you don't know about, then you won't really be able to prepare for them. Right. And sort of the reason I bring up the triathlon is because, triathlon's obviously swim, bike, run, and everyone focuses on that. But the fourth big thing that no one talks about is nutrition. Right. And, you have to be as dialed in with your nutrition plan as you are with your other train up. And that's just something sort of relating it back to Best Ranger. The nutrition plan is huge. And that's a part people don't even think about. You get your MREs and you could either just eat when you feel like it, or, all right, we have these 8 MREs. Here's when I'm going to eat this. Here's when I'm going to eat this. Here's when I'm going to eat this. And I think that if you can sort of approach each aspect like that, once you find out what the events are in Competitors Week, what the task condition standards you receive from the RIs in Competitors Week, just once you do all that, and if you can actually put together a cohesive game plan, then I think having that experience, not necessarily doing it, but just doing that analysis and sort of what that looks like, all right, how do we use this information, what's relevant, et cetera, to create a game plan that can sustain you to a finish.
Yeah, and nutrition is a huge one. A lot of people don't even think about. But, I see BRC or Best Ranger competition kind of like any college sport or any professional sport. You want to peak your nutrition and your physical fitness when you hit the competition. And I've seen some teams in the past. There's a team a few years ago from ARTB that I honestly think probably could have finished and won. They ended up finishing, I think, 16th that year. But one of their competitors, I think I mentioned in a former podcast, he was pissing blood day 1. He had rhabdo and was pissing blood. So he kind of peaked prior to the competition and was kind of in that gray area. And so he suffered through that for 3 days. Still placed 16th, which is insane. But the nutrition and the timing and everything. And that brings me to another point. You might not even be tracking yet, but R6 is currently working on approving a nutritional guidelines for Best Ranger this year. So where there will be things that you'll be allowed to bring and graze throughout the competition. Because they're really trying to all right, who's the best competitor, right? Yeah,
what's the limit?
Give them the fuel they need, give them everything they need, and just let them run. So what do you think with that being this year and actually having a nutrition list for the first time? How do you think that will play effect into the train up for these teams and trying to time that and maybe using those same nutrition techniques?
Absolutely
adds another layer to that training.
From a train up wise, I honestly don't know if it'll change too much. I think, we would hope with that we get a list pretty early on of what supplements are actually going to be allowed, because sort of from a racing standpoint, right? One of the big things is ultimately every person's body is different. And so you want to figure out what works with you. And then you want to practice, what you're going to be using and sort of what your game plan is going to be on race day, in your training. Yeah. So you can build that muscle memory, and we call it stomach memory in triathlon. Yeah. Sounds crazy, but it's like a real thing, because you don't want to introduce any new variables as best as possible on race day. So I think, hopefully we'll be able to get that. That's definitely something, I'll work with our sort of main physical training coaches and sort of everyone else who's supporting the ARTB competitors. And we'll absolutely integrate that in from a training standpoint. Like, it'll be, we'll have certain carbohydrate goals per hour during this, type of activity, where it's like, hey, all right, this week we're going to hit this. And then, all right, let's see next week, can we take it a little bit more? Because ultimately, with anything physical, it just becomes an energy equation.
Right.
So, you're burning X calories. All right, so we need to take in Y calories, and you need to have Z grams of carbohydrates and this amount of fat and this amount of protein. And I think during the competition, ultimately, it's just going to allow us to push even harder. Yeah. So I think if it does end up getting approved and it's, pretty fair across the board, then I'm like super excited to sort of see, this year, sort of the levels that they can push to. Because ultimately, I think as anyone that's done it before knows, like at some point by day 2 and day 3, or, night land nav, it's been just about surviving and not like
what
dying.
Fuel do you have?
Versus thriving. Yeah. Especially like that last run is all, people are limping across, which, we might still have some people limping across, and, and more power to them. But yeah, hopefully, if we get those extra sort of nutrition and grazing, then I think the times and just the level of competition is ultimately going to be higher.
Go higher.
Which is going to be super exciting from a non-competitor standpoint this year, to watch everyone else do it.
Well, and if you think about it too, like just as a former competitor, like in a small nutrition realm, when you competed the first time, you probably didn't know that you were going to be given drip, drop, hoist, my high, and all these different hydration things to like test out, see which one you wanted to use during the competition, and we'd provide those throughout the competition. Well, I'm sure, like, as someone that hasn't competed before, and they get here and they're like, if you try some of those different ones, like, you might get the runs because your body's not used to it and stuff. So, like, coming back a second year to compete, you're getting your drip drop, your my high, and your hoist. Like, now, okay, well, which one did I like? So I'm going to use that in my off season to train up because I know I'm getting it. And so I think that it plays a big effect into like how people perform in game and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And like, not trying to give away too many of the secrets, but like one of the big things nutrition wise coming back at least was like, you don't always have access to all your food. So it's like, all right, when you think about your nutrition plan, like, for instance, starting off, you have your OCPs, you have your Camelback, and that's really it. So it's like for like the first 3 or 4 events. So it's like, all right, what items do I need for those events? All right, so I know I need to put like 2 snacks in my cargo pockets, and I need to put this main meal in my taps with this supplement, etc. So that way, when you'll have access to it, so you can time it right. Because otherwise, you'll just go for like 6 hours, burning 3,000 calories without taking anything in, and it's like, well, sorry, man. We'll see you next year.
Well,
you're pretty much done.
Sitting in like the brigade meetings, they've pitched so many different options around, because you've seen it, where you've got your ruck on as a team and you're just rucking until it never ends. They've talked about, do they set up little cash points? Since they do the pick your own destiny again, do they just set up like a cache point? Like, all right, our team is going from this range to this range. We're going to cache our stuff here. We're going to go hit this range, this range, this range, and we're going to come back, hit our cache again. Like, not saying that's what's going to happen this year, but they've talked about that. Like, when it comes to like the levels of gaming that starts to produce with nutrition and, make sure you're caching your ruck at a location that you can get back to and get your, food and stuff like that. Like, it's a game changer. I think it'll be definitely interesting to see this year too, because I think this year's competition is going to be pretty wild. All right, so another question I have for you is, what advantages, does it give being here at the Airborne Ranger Training Brigade as an RI, right? So there's some advantages and definitely some disadvantages. So let's hit some of the advantages first. Like, as an RI, as, a captain, a staff sergeant here on camp, what advantages do you have with the terrain here when training?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll just go ahead and I'll squash one of the rumors right now, we don't get the con-op ahead of time. Like, I think the battalion and brigade does a pretty good job of, for instance, like I was on the fence about competing this year versus not competing. And it was like, as soon as that was mentioned and people knew, I was thinking about competing, like I wasn't involved in any conversations. Like literally I got kicked out of a battalion meeting when they switched to like a BRC thing, and they're like, Chem Swafford, you actually have to leave. And I was like, oh, all right. Yeah. So
that's always been a myth.
Like, people think we get it. We don't. We know about as much as everyone else. You know. Well,
and this year, I mean, the command team's talking about releasing the plan anyways.
Yeah.
So like that kind of just rules out any benefit of the plan, because if they just publish, here's day 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now everybody has it.
Yeah. Which I mean, like I would just say on that is like, and that's where maybe having the experience of the competition comes from, is like in general, like as long as you sort of have someone in your corner who's done it before and, made it, or, sort of been involved with it, like you'll have a general idea of it. Like the fundamentals don't really change.
Right.
Like it's still going to have some pretty big major events, general structure might change slightly, like, what's on what day, how it looks, is it chronological or is it like choose your own? But generally, like, it's going to be the same stuff, It's going to be a lot of rucking, a lot of running, a lot of shooting, just the slight stuff might change. So, like, by like the time you get it in competitors week, like, you should already generally have a plan. Yeah, and it's like, all right, now we're just making like 5 to 10% changes. Right. And we're confirming some things or we're denying some things.
Yeah. So really, like, I mean, the only advantages I'd even say that you have as in RI is, okay, you can run the area. You're in the area, so you don't have to climatize as much, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like I mean that is a huge advantage. Like I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's not.
Yeah.
I mean we also have some disadvantages being RIs that I think we'll talk about in a second that will make people think like, oh, it's all right. It's maybe not quite as glamorous.
Yeah.
But like that is a big advantage. Like obviously, like we run Malvesti, we run Derby Queen. The terrain the competition is going to be on is the terrain that we work in. So, I mean, that helps. But, I mean, ultimately, it's still have to make a good training plan that integrates it all, covers all of our bases, physical and technical and shooting wise. And I just say, like, I think I even when I was doing it from Alaska, like, and competing from there, ARTB is not gatekeeping anything. Yeah. Like, if you plan well and reach out early enough and just do it in the right way, like you can come out on Malvesti and Derby Queen and practice as well.
So, and that's one thing. It's always fun to see come February, March. You start to see the teams coming in. You can already see them starting to run. They'll stay locally. They'll run the area, stuff like that. So, and at that point, like everybody's kind of getting a feel for the area. But like you said, you do have some disadvantages, and I think this is a big thing a lot of people don't see. And it kind of reminds me a lot of like when I was with West Point, those guys are teaching, you go to units like, the 82nd or the 101st, those guys are being pulled out of their unit and they're putting on BMM and that's their job now is to train for Best Ranger. After Best Ranger, all right, you're back in your unit, So with being an RI, do you get pulled out of your job?
So I think that's the intent at the end of the day is to, obviously if the goal is to do as well as possible and try to win it, I think you sort of have to, because sort of like you mentioned it, like it's similar to collegiate athletics, sort of that level of competition. Like, I mean, you pretty much have to do this full time to like have a real shot. And especially if other units are doing it, then it's like, well, if like one unit does it, it sort of forces everyone else's hand because it's like, all right, if they're doing it, then if we want to beat them, then it's like, well, we sort of also have to do it. I think thankfully, the team and the program has the backing of ARTB, and I think we like will eventually get pulled on sort of those BMM to be able to do it. But so I think for right now, like though, we're still RIs at the end of the day. Like right now, I've been telling everyone, plan on walking in January, which I'll say if you haven't had the joy of coming and being an RI yet, which it is a great job and it's a lot of fun. I'm not saying this sarcastically. Like the walks can be pretty exhausting though. Like especially sort of from me as I've experienced this year trying to really compete at like the world level for triathlon and be an RI. It's like, it's a lot coming off like a 24 or 30 hour shift where you're on your feet, you're not sleeping a lot, you're not eating a lot because you're with the students, and then trying to go, perform athletic wise and cram like 3 workouts into 18 hours and still recover and then the next day do it again. Like,
well, and
it's a lot.
I imagine that too. Like it messes like with how do you plan nutrition when you're doing that, right? Because like as an RI, you're walking too. Like you're walking with those students. You're out there patrolling, so you're eating MREs or just any pogey bait you have. Like it's got to take an effect when a dude's walking for 24 hours of the class, eating like junk, and then the next morning he's got to be like, all right, well, I know I'm tired, but I got to get my mileage in, so I've got to go run. Like,
Well, I'll say the right answer, if there's any, future Ranger students listening, is, RIs don't eat. Like I had a student ask me that once, and they're like, sir, do you y'all eat? And I was like, no, we don't. But no, I mean, you find ways to get it in, just not in front of the students. Yeah. And there are certain times throughout the day that we know it's appropriate to eat. But yeah, it's just being, we have to be almost even more deliberate and meticulous with our plan. And so sort of, as we've, myself and some of the other coaches who are involved with sort of making everything, we just had to be very, so like I said, just deliberate. It's since we have people from other battalions who are on different class schedules, it's also, okay, when are we free to do these major things? But then otherwise it's almost like, hey, here's 10 workouts for the week. Yeah. Workouts 1 through 6 are the priority. You have to get these done, ideally in this order. The other 4 workouts, it'd be nice to do, but if you can't do it because of the schedule, it's understandable. Yeah. But these ones are the priority that we sort of need to get done in this way. And it's just sort of trusting that, when it comes time to that part of the schedule, if we're not on those orders yet, it's just trusting our competitors that it's they're, which, I think as a coach from what I've seen so far, have every faith they will do this, that they take it seriously enough and they're committed enough and care enough about doing well and trying to win that they'll execute. And then, it's sort of just as a coach, taking the feedback as much as we can, especially from them with this, really varying schedule, and just being like, all right, hey, how'd that feel? How'd that work? How are you feeling? Do we need to switch anything? Well,
and I think there's a big thing on when you're training separate, when you've got a bunch of elite athletes that are in the top 1% of the military, of course they're going to be doing the right thing when no one's looking. But there's just another level to when you get all 10 to 12 guys together and you're training together, because you're going to push a little bit harder because your buddy over here is actually catching up to you. Okay, well, I'm gonna push a little harder today. The competitor within all the competitors being together, it makes a difference. So that's definitely a handicap when half your team is down in 6th RTB and you're up here in 4th and trying to get that mesh together, and hopefully it gets to the point where eventually RIs can get pulled so they can train just like that. Because think about it. Regiment's won, but ARTB's been in the top, even with walk-in patrols and stuff like that. So I think it'd be pretty interesting to see, all right, let's pull a couple teams from walk-in. You'll probably hear some complaining from some other RIs that are walking more, but at the end, if the goal is to bring the championship home, you got to get yourself on that same playing field that the guys that are winning are.
Maximize success.
Yeah. So, with that, so you did your tryouts a couple days ago.
Yep.
Last week. I got to see it. It was pretty fun in the rain. Lots of fun. Yes. But so without giving any secrets away, what are some of the strengths that you see from some of the teams that we were talking earlier, I mentioned 2 guys that I saw that were man, those 2 are studs. But you made the good point, you've talked about a few times, it's more than just being a physical stud. Meshing as a team, having, being able to shoot, is a big thing. Having tactics, techniques, stuff like that. What are some of the strengths in the short time you've seen so far with your teams, that you see ARTB performing well in this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we had a pretty good tryout, I think. We tried to design it to mimic a lot of sort of the stress that they'll feel on day one. And I think in our train up, especially as we're sort of still in the initial period, while we're sort of assessing who we want on the final teams, we'll continue to make events that maybe mimic different aspects, so we can get a better comprehensive picture, like you're saying, that involves some of the techniques, the shooting, etc. Yeah, but I think so far, I'm really excited with the crop we have. Yeah. I generally knew of or at least of almost everyone who was trying out. had a good idea of sort of who they were, sort of like what they'd bring, but still had a few question marks. And I mean, I was pleasantly surprised, and I walked away from our tryout, like I said, just very, very excited for the group that we have this year.
No, I know as a competitor, you probably walked into those tryouts thinking like, okay, if we don't have that many good performers, I'm going to have to compete. Like I'm sure that went through your mind at some point. Is that even a possibility? Like now that you've seen the teams, and like, are you looking more forward to coaching, or is there a chance like you'll be like, all right, maybe I'll still compete?
No, like I mean, I think unless catastrophe happens and like so many people get injured,
yeah.
But like I just bought a brand new bike, like I'm so committed to triathlon, like I just spent way too much money, so it's like no. But I mean, I am genuinely excited to coach and help them, and
that's awesome.
So I think that one of the sort of intangible things maybe that I've seen that I've been telling everyone, like all the other RIs, is like, and sort of part of the reason why I didn't sort of feel the need to go out and try to compete this year is like just hearing the people we have, like how excited they are to go and compete. Like, some of the people from 4th I sort of knew who were like wanted to do it for a while. Like they've all told me that it's like, this has been sort of similar to me, like my first year that I did it, like, they'd had it pinpointed and were like, I want to do it so badly. Yeah. And just all the questions they'd ask me before the tryout, and just hearing how excited they were, and like they were so thrilled to hopefully be a part of it. Yeah. And that filled me as like, all right, like there's a great group of people, like sort of like what I was saying earlier, like I know I'll be able to trust them even when the scheduling gets tough and the train up gets tough, where it's like they have the drive and they have the passion to keep pushing through and trust me and trust the other coaches that we're not gonna just mess them up and hopefully not lead them astray. Awesome. Which sort of, just makes me, sort of take it a little more seriously. It's like, I need to do the best job I can, because seeing how excited they are and sort of, how physically fit they are too. Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm not saying we have any, 121 ruckers out there for 12 mile, like, but like, we might have 8 people in the 130s, just saying, maybe not, but y'all don't know. Right. But no, yeah, I mean, still very physically fit. Like you said, we were in some pretty rough terrain. I'm sure people have already started Strava looking at some of the people, and you might not, like the times might not be impressive, but when you factor in the amount of elevation and non-asphalt surfaces we introduced, and the fact that it was pissing rain the entire day and made the roads like just muddy. Like we have some absolute dogs this year. That's awesome. And they're going to be up there with the like winners of the physical events if they don't win it themselves.
So are we saying that this is the year that ARTB takes it back?
There's a lot of variables, and sort of like you were saying, like we don't really know some of the other skill levels, but I am super confident with sort of the people we have so far and the sort of support teams that I think we're going to have. We have a really good shooting train up, and we have a really good physical training support team, and obviously have a lot of good resources here inside ARTB, and I think we have the right group of people that ultimately we'll still have to go out and execute, and it's probably going to come down to millimeters, but I mean, I think so far we definitely have every shot to go and raise those pistols for ARTB at the end. Awesome.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. And I want to thank you for your time. I thank you for coming out and let me watch you guys and get some pictures and videos of you guys training up. It was pretty fun, especially watching the one kid run like an extra mile and a half and still being competitive. So I definitely think ARTB is going to be a handful this year. So I hope you have happy holidays, and I look forward to seeing you guys out there on the field.
Yeah, appreciate it. We're just going to do some extra land nav to sort of make up for him getting lost. Right. But appreciate the opportunity to come talk.
All right. Well, have a good one.
Yeah, you too.